You cannot break the spirit of a Winchester. Hello and welcome to Rotted Review of the Day, and today I am taking a look at the 2018 Helen Mirren movie, Winchester. Now this movie is based on a real-life situation. Madame Winchester did exist. She was the heiress to the Winchester Repeating Arms Company, and she did build a house and continue building on it until the day she died. For spiritual reasons, for superstitious reasons, basically believing that if construction were to ever cease, that bad things would happen. And so when I heard about this movie being made, I was very, very, very interested in it. One, I like the story of Madame Winchester in general. I know that there's a museum out there with a house that you can, tour, and I would love to do that someday. Two, if you know this channel, I really like haunted house movies. Three, I really liked Rose Red, which, if you've never seen the miniseries, if you've never read the book, that was a Stephen King work that the Winchester story clearly took that as inspiration. So I was really looking forward to this, and I was kind of very eager to see where it would turn out. And where it turned out was kind of in a place of not knowing what it was supposed to do, what it was supposed to be. And ultimately, by jack of all trades, master of none, it wound up in a place of mediocrity. So to get into why and how and at what level, let's get into the categories. As always, 4 different categories, each one worth up to 25 points for a total possible score of 100 points. And the plot follows a main character of a psychiatrist, Dr. Eric Price, who is tasked by the Winchester Repeating Arms Company to visit Mrs. Winchester. And they are worried about her eccentric behavior and her ability to be the majority shareholder of the company, and basically wanting to strip that away from her. So they hire a psychiatrist to go up there and make a determination of her mental state and give them reason to be able to wrangle control of the company away from her. So he goes up there and he gets introduced to the house and the nature of the house, and he gets introduced to Mrs. Winchester and her family and the people that are working on the house, and the people that not just working on the house, but working for the house in not a servant capacity, but in a butler-ish kind of way, things like that. And the movie just kind of takes off from there. And overall, what I would say about the plot is that it was decently average, but there just really wasn't anything terribly special about it, which I found to be very disappointing, because with the setting and with the character, there was a lot special about the material that it could have worked with, and to take all of that spectacular storytelling fodder and ultimately come up with something kind of meh, it was disappointing. I gave the plot a 13 out of 25. It wasn't bad. I don't want to give the impression that this was a bad movie or this was a bad plot. It really wasn't, and I do actually kind of recommend seeing it if you just happen to have a lazy Saturday and you want to kick on a movie. This would actually be an okay one to watch. I'm not going to go out of my way to recommend it to people, but I'm not going to dissuade them from watching it either. Yeah, like I said, I don't want to give the impression this is bad. It's not. It's just, it had so much potential, and I don't feel it really lived up to it. Wow, story of my K through 12 education there. The intent, this is where things really, really fell down, and I think that has to do with not knowing what it was supposed to be. Was this supposed to be a scary movie? Was this supposed to be a character study with the psychiatrist? Was this supposed to be a loose biography of Mrs. Winchester? It didn't know. It tried to be all three at different times, and ultimately it just all kind of failed. It wasn't scary. It wasn't interesting exploring the psychiatrist. It wasn't interesting exploring the biography of Mrs. Winchester. It ultimately didn't set out for achieving anything that it intended to. So I gave the intent 11 out of 25. Ultimately, it was a relatively entertaining movie that was brought to screen, so I do have to give it some points for that. It was worth a watch. again, I'm just not going to rally behind it. So 11 out of 25 for The Intent. The acting, as you might guess, is one of the higher parts of this. However, it is not as high as I feel like it really should have been. I gave the acting 16 out of 25. It was decent. It was decent, but really nothing more. It really didn't elevate beyond anything. It didn't go terribly above average. And again, a lot of potential. I mean, Helen Mirren, just so much acting chops there. And I feel like we really didn't get a solid performance. There wasn't a lot of range. The dialogue wasn't really written that terribly well. And it felt like from all parties, it was a bit of a payday and go home kind of movie. And maybe that's the case. And maybe, if that has its place in the world of cinema. But even so, grading it and scoring it, I'm going to give the acting 16 out of 25. And the technical, this had all of the big budget effects that worked in a let's throw money at it and make it tight kind of way. But nothing worked in terms of scares. And that's one of those things where you don't necessarily need a solid plot for. You certainly don't need big budget for effects for. Ultimately, what that comes down to is craftsmanship and artistry with editing and with sound design and with just pacing in general and your camera work and your cinematography and just figuring out how those things can come together. Ultimately, if you do have a good plot line and it can work in service of the scares, it makes them all the more better. But there is no reason you couldn't eke out, 4 or 5 decent jump scares with nothing more than some hollow characters and clever editing. And this really didn't do even that. So I have to pull back on the technical score, say that there was technically glaring issues if you're trying to make a scary movie and you can't even pull that out. So 13 out of 25 points for there, which gives us a total of 53 out of 100 points, which lands it right where I would kind of expect, in the middle and in a world of desperate mediocrity, which, again, not a bad movie, but I loved the Winchester story, and I loved haunted house movies, and I love Helen Mirren, and I wanted to love this movie, and I just couldn't, and that to me was a bit of a tragedy. So, do I regret watching the movie? No, absolutely I don't. I don't regret it. I am just not, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed. So that should about do it for this Rotted review. I'm going to be discussing a lot more spoilery and thematic issues in the deep dive discussion video that'll accompany this one. And mark my words, there definitely will be, because I want to discuss this further. So look for that. Other than that, next time you want to watch a horror movie, first make sure that it's good and rotted.